This is Real Learning with Real People. These conversations are with real people. They're unscripted and they're designed to pull tidbits of information from people who are grinding right now to get the most out of their lives. With minimum amounts of editing and maximum authenticity, we hope to provide lessons that anybody will find effective, relatable, and entertaining. We seek to have guests that provide learning that's based on their life experiences. Some are chosen because of their experience as high performers in sport, business, or education, and other guests have been chosen because they have meaningful lessons to teach, and I want to make sure they have the platform to share them with the world. The language in these videos is sometimes mature, as I'm always encouraging guests to just be themselves. This is all part of making sure that we do our best to give you content that is both authentic and effective, and that you truly feel like you can utilize the real learning and connect with these real people. Alan Stein Jr. is someone I've looked up to since I was first entering the coaching world over 10 years ago. He teaches proven strategies to improve organizational performance, create effective leadership, increase team cohesion and collaboration, and develop winning mindsets, rituals, and routines. All that means that he can help you get better than you are right now, better than pretty much anybody else. Now, in the world of basketball, Alan has spent over 15 years working with some of the highest performers in the world. People like Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, the late, great Kobe Bryant himself, and many others. Alan has taken the knowledge he's spread further than the basketball court though, as he uses many of his concepts in business and corporate training as well. In this setting, Alan has worked with companies like American Express, Pepsi, Sabra, love their hummus, Starbucks, Charles Schwab, and many, many more. You absolutely have to check out his book, Raise Your Game, High Performance Secrets from the Best of the Best, which is available just about everywhere and well worth the read. Now, we may have many people on the show who are high performers in their own right, but Alan brings a level of humanity to this interaction that really comes through in our conversation. It's no wonder he's able to successfully relate to so many people in so many different niches. Whether you're in the sport world or not, I guarantee this conversation with Alan has something for you. Here's my conversation with Alan Stein Jr. The Alan Stein Jr., how are you today?
I am fantastic. It's nice to connect with you.
Yeah, you too. And I'm trying to look at you in the eye or have my good Zoom etiquette and look in the camera, but I'm having a hard time not looking at some of those pictures behind you. So I was wondering if maybe you could just, because I feel like anybody else watching this is going to do what I'm doing, maybe walk us through a couple of these that we can see here behind you before I get right into it.
You know, it's pretty interesting. If you were to walk through my apartment, I'm very much a minimalist. You know, I don't have very many things, and that's by choice. I don't like a lot of clutter. And really the only exception to that is my office, which is one of the bedrooms in my 3-bedroom apartment. And almost every square inch is covered with some type of picture or piece of memorabilia. I've got some big bookshelves on the other side of the camera here. And I just love pictures. You know, I think pictures are a great way to remind us of some of the things we've done and people we've met and places we've been. And the pictures right behind me are from some of the Nike Skills Academies that I had a chance to work, you know, with guys like Kobe Bryant and Kevin Durant and Chris Paul. So I kind of like using those as kind of my backdrop for any of the calls that I do. So yeah, that's really where those came from. And, you know, as I'm sure we'll dive into kind of my relationship to the game of basketball and how that's played a major role, you know, from the time I was 4 years old all the way up to present day where I'm, you know, 44 years old.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I'm probably going to end up touching on some of that. I'll try and fight myself. Like I was saying before, it's not supposed to be a basketball show, but if I'm talking to you, it's going to go that way. We just all need to accept that. So for the listeners, they need to know it's going to end up there a bit too.
Well, you know, but the good news for your listeners, even if they don't like basketball to the degree that we do, my goal is always to take things that I learned from the game or learned from coaches and players and show folks how to apply those same principles and mindsets to their own lives and to their own businesses. So in all essence, while I'm sure we will touch on a few things that are within a few degrees of the game of basketball, I actually don't believe this will be a basketball conversation. I think we'll talk things that are more performance related in life, in business, even if you want to go down the path of talking about parenting, like whatever you think's a good fit. Basketball might be the spark, but the real juice will be everything else that we cover.
Oh my gosh, I think we might be long lost brothers. I don't know.
Cool.
You're speaking my language, and I'm going to do everything I can to not talk parenting, because that's my daily conversations, and where my life's at is to avoid becoming a parent, at least in the short term. Uh, so as usual with our show, we like to get a really good understanding on the lens and the framework that people kind of were given and grew as they grew up. And so if you could just tell us a little bit about what growing up was like with you, what mom and dad were like, siblings, and that sort of thing.
So I grew up in a suburb of Washington, D.C., which is still where I live now, which is Gaithersburg, Maryland. As I mentioned, I'm 44 years old, so I was born in the mid-'70s. I have a younger brother that was born 3.5 years after me. So that's my only sibling. And he and I have a great relationship to this day. We actually work together. You know, I'm a professional keynote speaker and author by trade, but he's kind of my digital ninja, and he edits my videos, he produces my podcast, he helps manage my social media account. So he's kind of the behind the scenes for everything I do from a business standpoint. And he lives down in Florida, but it's, you know, he and I speak on a daily basis. Both of my parents were elementary educators for 30 years. Both of my parents are still alive and healthy today, so something else to be very grateful for. So I grew up in a middle-class household with two very loving and supporting parents. Grew up with a very strong respect and appreciation for teachers and for servant leaders in general. You know, I've always considered teaching, along with coaching, to be two of the most altruistic professions on earth. Because teachers don't do it for the money. They do it because they love pouring into young people. They love helping others, and same thing with coaches. So I always grew up with a very firm foundation in that regard. My parents were very supportive and allowed my brother and I to try as many different activities and sports and things as we could. But basketball was my first identifiable passion. And I fell in love with the game at 4 years old when my parents signed me up for my first recreation league, and here 4 decades later, it's still a major pillar in my life. So I'm very thankful for the fact that something I fell in love with when I was really little is still something I love to this day, and still has an impact on my life to this day. And, you know, as we kind of talk about the journey from being 4 to being 44, basketball has been within a couple degrees of really everything I've ever done. You know, the best experiences I've had, the best places I've traveled, the best people I've met, usually are within a couple degrees of the game of basketball. So for that, I'll always feel very indebted to the game itself, and always indebted to players and coaches. So any opportunity I have to give back to the game or give back to players and coaches, I always try and take advantage of that opportunity.
That's awesome. And you continue to speak my languages, just in terms of altruism and kind of being in service of others. And that really being something that's fundamental for me, for what we do in our business. But I'm not shocked to hear that you have 2 teachers for parents, because I do think that you always kind of vibe with other educators a certain way, and educators generally do breed educators. And that's something that we can't really deny for sure. I think that it's something that's I'm not going to go as far as to say that it's genetic, but there's a piece there for sure. Now, the question that we ask everybody on the show, and it's actually kind of a tough question for some, is for each parent, could you describe them in a word?
Boy, I love that. And I love challenging questions. And, you know, I've done hundreds of interviews in the last couple of years, and that's a new one for me. Well, I don't know that I could. You know, one thing that I can say about my parents together is they're very compatible. They're incredibly different. They have very different traits and different personalities, but they work really well together. And I think even before I could identify that, I could kind of see growing up as an example that 2 people can have a great relationship that don't think and walk and talk the exact same way. You know, that differences can be embraced. And I really believe that, especially from a team component. You know, why I think diversity is so important, that you can actually create an incredibly cohesive unit, whether it's in business or it's in sport. And yet within that unit, you've got some very, varying ages and varying races and males and females and varying perspectives from where they've come from. And yet they can still be a cohesive unit. So I'll have to give some more thought to an individual word for each, but I'll take the easy way out and just say compatible to describe them as a married couple.
And I'll be honest, you're the first person who has gone on the road of describing their parents as a couple. And I think that might actually be more challenging, but it's interesting that was just so surface level for you. And it's good. I think again, it probably speaks to a little bit of the reason why you are how you are in terms of being able to engage with others and that kind of thing is experiencing that compatibility at an early age. Do you think that the environment that you and your brother were raised in contributed to where you ended up now?
Oh, most certainly. And I think, to be honest, to some degree, and it's always the nature versus nurture debate, but I mean, I think any human being walking the earth right now, the environment that they grew up played a role in whatever they're doing right now. And that doesn't matter if someone is incredibly happy and successful or somebody's incarcerated, where and how they grew up in that environment played a role in that. Now, how much of a role it played, how big of a piece of the pie will certainly vary from person to person. But, I know, especially with the work I do in studying habits and behaviors and the way, the things that we do, I know how important environment is. I know that it's not even just your physical environment, but it's also kind of the emotional environment that you're in and the people that you surround yourself with. So yeah, without question, growing up in a middle-class household, where, we certainly were far from wealthy, but, I never had to fight for a meal. I never had to worry about having a winter coat or, being able to go on a field trip. Certainly didn't have technology the way we had it today, but if something like Atari came out, I'm able to get a game to play Atari. So I consider myself very fortunate to grow up in an environment where my immediate needs and my safety were certainly taken care of, but even some of the lower level desires and wants and nice to haves were as well. Both of my parents were very present, as far as taking my brother and I to sports and would sit and watch and cheer, so all of those things have absolutely played a major role just in kind of how I see the world. But what I also think is incredibly interesting is I'm very different from my parents. And if you were interviewing them, they would tell you the same thing. I have a very different perspective on many of today's hot topics that are really different than they view. They tend to share a lot of similar views, going back to that compatibility. And I actually view things very, very differently. And part of that has just been my own maturation and self-exploration, where when I was younger, I just believed everything that they believed. And I think a lot of kids do that. I even see that now as a parent myself. My children just tend to believe what I tell them and what I believe. And as I got older, I started to uncover and turn over some rocks and ask myself, well, why do I believe this? Whether it's a thought on religion or a thought on politics or a thought on any topic you could come up with. And I kept asking myself, why do I believe this? And if my answer to that question was, well, that's what you were taught when you were little, I didn't really like that as an answer. So I would start doing some research on my own and form my own opinion. And certainly some of the things that I was taught when I was younger, I still hold those beliefs today, but there's a lot of others that I don't. And I think that is just part of the maturation process of doing that self-exploration and kind of coming up with my own life philosophy. So yes, my parents had a huge impact, and my environment had a huge impact on who I am today. But that was also just kind of the foundation. The rest of it are all of the other environments and people that I've been around that have helped mold my life's view.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I think I'm instantly thinking of that scene from Step Brothers where he's like, did we just become best friends? Because you spoke Abraham Maslow to me there, which I really enjoy. So as soon as you start talking about growing up in a household where you have your safety and your needs taken care of, and the way that sets you up, I've had a lot of conversations about that with various people, especially recently, trying to gain some understanding. We're partnered with an organization that's championing equity and humanity and equality right now, and so I've been involved in more and more of those conversations.
Nice.
and really gaining that understanding of the difference that it makes when you have those basic needs covered early and consistently. And just that alone, we're not bringing any other factors into it. Just that alone makes a massive difference.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that obviously in the world today, especially here in the United States, that the racial inequities and social injustices that have triggered, protests for the last, 120 days. And those have been a long time coming. It brings up the topic of systemic racism. And I think one of the things that makes it so hard for us to make the progress that most people want to see made is kind of this theory of kind of from generation to generation, and that what I'm teaching my children right now will have a very heavy impact on how they see the world when they're older. Now, it doesn't necessarily define it. As I explained, I've changed many of my views on things, but it does have an impact. And the reason that I bring that up, first and foremost, certainly hope nothing would ever get taken out of context. But I mean, racism is absolutely, positively inexcusable. It's abhorrent and it's unacceptable without question. However, I have an understanding of how it keeps getting perpetuated. And that is, if racist parents create an environment where racist comments and racist thoughts are accepted and are okay, then you greatly increase the chance that that young person is going to grow up with those same racist thoughts. And hopefully when they get older and get outside of their neighborhood and they see an expanded view of the world, hopefully they have the humility and vulnerability and compassion to change those views. But that's what's making this so hard. So when you have different pockets in the United States where racism is much more prevalent and unfortunately to say more accepted than in some other areas, well, anyone that comes out of that environment is going to skew towards having more racist thoughts. And that's where this cycle, it's so hard to stop. Thankfully I was grown up in a household that didn't have those beliefs. So it made it very easy for me to grow up without those beliefs. And now I don't, I've got the worldviews that I share with my children, but I know as a father that I could be teaching my children some really devious stuff and they would believe me at face value because they're younger and they look to me for truth. And I could be brainwashing them with some really outlandish beliefs, not even just on racism, on anything, and they would most likely believe me. And that's really scary. That's a scary power to have. And that's where I think this whole systemic racism concept, it's so challenging, because until we can start getting today's generation to implant better beliefs and model better behavior for the next generation, we're going to continue to see some degree of this cycle. And I certainly don't have the answer on how we can break some of those cycles, but I hope that is what happens, because I think it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, and a lot of it too is having the safe spaces to just have the conversation for white people, right? And by safe, I don't mean all white. I mean a safe conversation for white people to have conversation that is authentic and not having to check words and say the quote unquote right thing, but gain understanding and learning. Have you had the opportunity to read Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility?
I have not.
Okay, so
I've seen a lot of buzz around it, and I've certainly seen there's a handful of books, how not to be an anti-racist and so forth. There's a whole bunch of books that have really gained popularity, and I've got them all in my queue that I would eventually like to read, but that queue gets longer by the day.
Yeah. And so just, you didn't ask, but I'm going to give it anyway. I would recommend moving that White Fragility book right up to the front, because it speaks, she does an amazing job of communicating a lot of stuff that I think I maybe had a awareness of. It was in the orbit of my conscience, but it didn't really fully resonate. I couldn't put a name to it. I couldn't describe it. And one of the things that I found in that book that really put a bow on something was the concept of aversive racism. And without going too far into it here, because I'm far from an expert, but the concept of being racist by nature of how much you're trying to show you're not racist. And therefore you're not gaining understanding, you're not learning, and the habits and behaviors of others are able to perpetuate because all you're worried about is not being racist.
Wow.
And in one of those conversations that I mentioned earlier with the partners that we work with, by the way, their company is called Ulu, ULU, or Uluntu, and we were talking a little bit about the fact that I was terrified to do it, but we're on Instagram Live, and I was like, I think this is important. I might get some backlash, and I did, and I did get a little bit of social media hate, but that's part of the gig these days. I said I'm guilty of aversive racism. I've had moments in my life, especially as a basketball coach, where people have challenged me or asked me a question because I'm supposedly the expert because I coach basketball by some connection. I don't know if you've ever experienced anything like that. And I said I've definitely had moments where I've been put on the defensive by my own mind, by my own life experiences, to show that I'm not racist, and then justified how not racist I am by the amount of Black people that I've interacted with through my profession and that kind of thing. And until I read this book, I knew in hindsight it was wrong. I knew in hindsight that wasn't how I wanted to represent myself. When she described to me the term aversive racism, it drastically changed my views and my understanding. And it also perpetuated the ability for me to be able to do things like I just said and say that it's definitely something I've done and I'm changing in the future. But I think the conversation and the safe space to have it is for sure important for everybody, just so that we can start to talk about it just like this.
Yeah. Well, generally speaking, I think that's one of the biggest faults of the world itself, but even the United States, even more in particular, is there's just tends to be a lack of civil and respectful discourse of opposing views. And I'm not even talking about racism here. I'm just talking about anything. I mean, here in the United States, this is an election year, so in 60 or 70
I didn't know.
days, and this is arguably one of the most divisive elections that we've ever seen, probably even more so than it was 4 years ago. And it's just crazy to me that there just seems to be a lack of being able to have this type of dispassionate discourse and being able to say, look, I hold my views very strongly. I understand you have some opposing views. We should be able to talk about these things in a civil way and in a respectful way. I should be working hard to be open to listening to your perspective and to your reasoning. And I would hope that you would give me the same respect and make it less about trying to convince the other person that you're right and convince the other person that they should adopt your mindset, but more of just openly sharing. And again, I always want to put these caveats in because I know that a soundbite can be taken out of context.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying that you need to be open to listening to racist views or something that's incredibly abhorrent. Those I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about philosophical life differences and political preferences and any hot topic that we could talk about, maybe not as far as racism, but as far as what are some of the solutions to hopefully improve some of the systemic racism that we see. I'm sure there's a variety of different perspectives on that from a variety of different people and backgrounds, and we should be open to talking about that. And one of the things that I liked about what you said is we should be able to create a safe environment where we don't have to feel that we need to censor every single word that we say, but we can speak more openly as long as in our heart we are intentionally trying to speak in a very respectful way. So we're not trying to say anything to inflame anyone or diminish anyone. We're not trying to, to sling mud in any way, shape, or form, but we should just be able to open up and speak honestly. And for me, I understand that the only way that I can view the world is through my current lens, which is basically the definition of white privilege. I am a middle-aged, straight white male. I mean, that is the epicenter, that is the peak of privilege in the world. And I acknowledge that. Now, I acknowledge that's through no fault of my own, but I acknowledge that I have been afforded some privileges in my life that others have not. Mm-hmm. And but still, this is the only way that I can view the world. And I still think that my perspective is important as one piece of the puzzle, as everybody needs to try to figure out, how we can all get along better and treat each other better. But it starts with me admitting that I can't possibly know what it's like to be Black, or to be a female, or to be gay, or to be any other description or group that I'm not a part of, I have to admit that I can't see the world through their lens. And the only thing that I can do, the next closest thing, is open up my heart and have as much empathy and compassion for hearing their perspectives as possible. And that's really what I've always tried to do. But I've really tried to heighten that over these last 6 to 7 months where, for the most part, the world has been flipped upside down for a variety of reasons. And I encourage my children to be open with those things. I tell my children, my goal is not to tell them what to think, it's to teach them how to think. I'm always very open with my children about what I believe, but I let them know that they are very free to choose their own beliefs, and that they don't have to adopt my mindset or my perspective. And it doesn't matter what we're talking about. I want them to know that they're free to come up with their own perspective on life. And, to me, if we could just fix that little piece of the puzzle, this lack of civility and respect about opposing views, it would open us up to make progress in all of these different areas. Things would be so much better if we could just take that one thorn out of the paw.
That's unreal. The Step Brothers scene is in my head again, and I didn't mean to pivot us into
such a great movie.
yeah. Like how can you not just reference that movie? And now I'm thinking of the scene where they're singing Guns N' Roses in the van, and that's not related at all. But in all seriousness, I appreciate that perspective, and I appreciate hearing the perspective from someone, and you'll probably disagree. I'm making an assumption there with maybe this term, but from someone of your stature, willing to talk about that openly, that's refreshing. Because again, you're not censoring yourself for fear of repercussion. Now, you happen to be very well spoken, so you and very well versed in making sure that you're taken at what you mean, and I appreciate that as well. But it brings up for me the concept of learning in these situations where we just cannot put ourselves in the shoes of somewhere else, where it's not an option to tell somebody that you get how they feel, and you have to actually have true empathy, not any kind of fake or false empathy. And it draws on me, and I'm trying to kind of piece this together daily in our work. The concepts from Carol Dweck, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and her mindset book and all that kind of stuff. And
yes,
it's been a bit bastardized here and there. And even she's kind of stated that a couple of times, where it's like, it's become something where people are like, well, my wall has a growth mindset poster on it, so we're a growth mindset team, and
right,
and that kind of thing. But if I can cherry pick for a moment, two things from her fixed and growth concepts, I'm really, really kind of digging my claws into the idea that when we focus on learning beyond all else, even in conversations of gender, sexuality, race, that kind of stuff, it really makes it hard to also be prejudiced. It doesn't make it impossible, but it does make it hard when learning's the focus. And when we couple that with staying away from the fixed mindset trait of being worried about what others think about us as at the forefront, all of a sudden those conversations, that space gets created. Because my initial thought has always been, especially over the last few months, great, we need safe spaces, but how do we make them? And trying to simplify that. And as you're talking, it's really reinforcing for me that concept of, if we can create an environment where the people involved are not worried about what others think as much. We all always are. And the concept that I love for that is FOPO as opposed to FOMO. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
Fear of people's opinions as opposed to fear of missing out. Yeah. I took that from Michael Gervais, the Seahawks performance coach.
I love him.
Yeah. And so if we can start to be aware of our FOPO and try and stay away from it, and be aware of learning as the premium concept in any interaction, all of a sudden it makes things a little bit easier. And I'm curious, just before we jump into a little bit of more of your experience, do you find that focusing on learning has been something that has created more opportunity for you in a variety of ways? Because I don't know if you know this, but you're pretty learning focused.
Oh, without question. And that's by design. And that's, been modeled and mentored for me from a lot of different people. And to me, I've always equated learning with growth and development with self-belief and self-confidence, and self-confidence and self-belief directly correlated to happiness and fulfillment. So if you kind of take out the middle chunks, I've always looked at, I'm the happiest when I'm learning new stuff, when I'm growing. And, sometimes that could be something, incredibly narrow. I want to learn something about how to be a better keynote speaker, or it could be something much broader. I want to learn how to have, better conversations with folks that have opposing viewpoints. But yes, to me, learning is key. And I really experienced that as a basketball performance coach. I would love to go watch a practice or go watch a clinic or a seminar and just take so many notes and get so excited with the new stuff I was learning. And I couldn't wait to get back with my players and do a new drill with them or share a new concept. I still get that way when I'm watching a documentary or listening to a podcast like this, or reading a new book. You have that little light bulb moment where you pick up a new nugget. And yeah, that excites me. And, as long as I feel like I'm continually progressing in each of the different areas of my life, then I'm going in the right direction. And that, again, direction is pointed towards, being the best version of myself and being happy and being fulfilled. So yeah, learning is a major staple in my life's perspective and the things that are important to me.
That's awesome. And I'm really glad that you didn't turn that around on me and be like, actually, I don't really care about learning, because that would have been, that would have really messed up my entire line of questioning that I was thinking in my head.
Yeah, that would have been an awkward redirect.
It probably would have just been done. Actually, I think it probably would have fallen out of line with the show that's called Real Learning with Real People. I think we might have lost it. And so connecting directly to that, I'm curious about leaping, because when people look back over your career professionally, you've had some moments where you've taken some big leaps, they've paid off, but and we can see those literally behind you, but we can see them in your work. I'm curious about if there's any great stories in your past about taking some leaps, falling, and having to pick yourself back up.
I don't know that there's necessarily like a singular epiphanal type moment or leap. But yeah, I mean, life really, without sounding too cliche and too overly dramatic, is just a series of reps. Every single thing we do in this world is just another rep. This is a rep for you hosting a podcast and interviewing someone. This is a rep for me being interviewed. This is another rep of us just having a conversation. Everything we do is just another rep. And the key is being open to the feedback loop of improving the reps that we get, making sure that the reps we get are quality reps. And ultimately that means every day is going to be a series of leaps. Some are smaller, a little hop, if you will, and some are much more profound. You're trying to jump between two cliffs or two buildings, but that's really all that it is. Life is a series of leaps.
Now, give me a second here, because I just have to talk about our new partner, Reflect. Reflect is one of the easiest ways to find a therapist. Just like our guests here on the podcast, we all go through phases in life that help us to learn, grow, and develop. And oftentimes, those phases involve change. Maybe it's a breakup from a relationship and the new realities of being single, or maybe it's a big promotion at work and juggling a new work-life balance. Whatever your situation, Reflect helps you to find a therapist that's perfect for you. Reflect actually uses a data-driven algorithm, and you know how I love that, and an experienced team to match you with the best therapist. Thanks to this, 80% of their clients see a meaningful improvement in their lives after just 6 sessions, which is huge. And depending on where you are, you can actually choose between in-person or teletherapy, so getting started has never been easier. As our partner, Reflect wants to actually give you $50 off your first therapy session. So simply go to joinreflect.com and use the promo code REAL50 to redeem your discount. That's $50 off your first therapy session when you go to joinreflect.com and use the promo code REAL50, all capital letters. Now back to our chat with Alan Stein.
Some of those leaps, you're going to fall flat on your face or fall down into the safety net. Other leaps, you're going to land with, a perfect 10 at the Olympics. And the key is when you land perfectly and a leap goes well, making sure you can unpack that and see what you did, deconstruct that so that you can do more of that, double down on the things that are working well, and any of the leaps that don't work out very well, where you do have a setback or you fall or you land in the net, being able to pull some lessons from that and learn from that leap that didn't go as well as you would like. And that's what's most important. For me, I try not to put too much pressure on any single rep or any single leap. If I were to have this huge speaking engagement at the end of this week, it would be easy to put some pressure on this and go, wow, this is for a really big company. The stakes are high. This is a really big deal. Well, yeah, if I'm going to look through it through that lens, but I can promise you that if I'm on my deathbed 40 years from now, that speaking engagement is probably not that big of a deal. So it's all the lens at which we look through it. So it's very easy to think that a certain leap that we're about to take or one that we just took is actually more impactful and more influential than it is. There's very few mistakes that you might have made 2 years ago that you even still remember today. Now, you may have had a big lapse in judgment and made a pretty catastrophic decision, and that there might still be some remnants of that. But generally speaking, yeah, that's why we should all be focused on learning and all be focused on getting in as many quality reps and taking as many leaps as we can, because each one is going to move us forward, either because it literally moves us forward or it teaches us a lesson that allows the next leap to move us forward.
Don't let me forget when we get off of this recording to talk to you about our company's app and software that we're creating, because
Perfect.
I didn't intend to plug it, but now I'm plugging it a little bit, but because I usually forget whenever I have a thought like that, that connects completely with some of the stuff that we're doing on that front. So
awesome.
But back to kind of not being able to reference a particular moment or like an epiphany type moment. I don't know if it's just for my ego, because I'm hoping that you haven't gone through everything without ever having somebody tell you what's what. Is there a moment in your career? Because I can think of a couple, especially in my early coaching days, where I had my boss at the time, Sean Swords is his name, and if he ends up listening to this, what's up, Sean? I'm telling the story about the time you got mad at me, but I acted unprofessionally with a colleague, and in that moment, I was kind of told, like, hey, young buck, like this isn't how this world's going to work. And if you keep doing that, you're not going to be in the sport world, not in the world itself. And
that's a heck of a threat.
Yeah. I'm curious if you've ever had any of those moments where somebody, because to me at that time, and still to me, it's like mentor of all mentors, and I owe him a ton. And the last thing I want to do is disappoint him. Do you have any of those type of moments, I guess, or conversations where maybe it's not an epiphany, but it's kind of like that heavy push in the proper direction came?
Oh, most certainly. And to be honest with you, arguably too many to count. And I still try to insulate myself now with an inner circle of people that care enough about me to still give me that push or still hold me accountable. Right now, and certainly by far, I'm not anywhere close to being a finished product. I'll always be under construction. I'll always be a work in progress. But I will say right now in present day, just generally speaking, as far as a trend, I have more self-awareness and more emotional intelligence today than I've had in any year prior. And I certainly hope that if you invite me back on your show a year from now, I can make the same claim and say, hey, today I've got more emotional intelligence than I had the day you had me on your podcast a year ago. So the goal is to keep improving. So with that, I do believe that I've got from an internal work standpoint, I've got some systems in place where I'm constantly reflecting internally and evaluating the things I do and the things I say. And I'm usually able to catch my own boneheaded mistakes now before anyone even needs to say anything to me. Now, I still have people that will, say, oh yeah, that was not the best thing to say, or that was not the best response, or you should change your mindset about this. But usually there's an alignment between the microscope that I put myself under and what they're sharing with me. Now, 10 years ago, there was a major disconnect because I severely lacked self-awareness, which means people were telling me stuff and these were just complete blind spots. I had no idea that what I was saying or what I was doing wasn't really pushing me in the right direction. So I needed them to course correct and help kind of be those bumpers, if you will, to funnel me in the right direction. But now, and I even verbalizing this, I don't want to make it sound like I've got life figured out and I've got this game on lock and that I don't need anybody's help, because that's not true. But now, more times than not, if I say or do something, I'm immediately aware of the fact that, you know what, I wish I could say that differently, or I wish I would have had a different response to this, or I wish I would have done this differently. And then now it's usually just confirmed by someone in my inner circle who says the same thing.
That's awesome. And I love the clear kind of drive away from defensiveness. Like I think that that's really, and we're both coaching, though I guess you've coached a couple bigger names than I have, one or two, but I find that some of the biggest limiting factors in terms of growth potential, especially for younger athletes, is that immediate defensiveness to feedback. It's like you don't even know. I might be giving you positive feedback, but I can already see in your body language that you're becoming defensive of it. And I continually see in interviewing people like yourself, who I quantify as pretty high performers, the aversion to defensiveness. Like probably the only thing that could make you defensive would probably be me telling you that you're being defensive, because it's just like, when learning's the focus, to kind of connect back, that defensiveness doesn't come.
No, you're so right on with that. And I think what the reason is because every single word or every single mental construct we have has some type of emotional connotation with it. And I think there are people that hear the word feedback and they actually view that as negative. They view feedback as a bad thing. Other words that are very similar, accountability. Some people view accountability as a bad word. I know a lot of young people hear the word discipline and they think that's a bad word because they equate discipline with punishment. And no one wants to be punished. So they think of discipline as being a punishment, and they think of punishment as being bad. So now they think discipline is bad. Well, I simply have a different relationship with that word. I think discipline is the key to everything we want in life. Whether you're chasing significance and success and respect, or you're chasing bliss and happiness and fulfillment, I think the key is discipline. I had a coach tell me when I was really young, and this wasn't an original quote of his. I don't know who the original author is, but he basically said, Alan, if you discipline yourself, then others won't have to. It's like, okay, well, that makes sense. I like that. So I've always believed in having high self-discipline. And it's the same thing with feedback. If you view feedback as criticism and someone is going to be taking personal shots at me and they're going to criticize my work or my effort, then you most likely will be a little bit defensive to that. However, if you look at feedback is the gateway to growth and feedback is a conduit to improvement, then you'll be very open and welcoming to it. And, I love the fact that you highlighted feedback can be positive or it can be constructive. Most people, when they hear the word feedback, they immediately think of something negative. They think of praise and then they think of feedback as being negative, where those things can coexist together. So for me, I work really hard to try to depersonalize feedback, whatever it is. If someone wants to give feedback on my interview with you right now, I want to make sure that I can step away from it as the human being and just look at it from an X's and O's standpoint, if you will, or look at it through an unbiased and sterile lens and just say, okay, let me listen to some of the feedback that they're giving and see if it's valid and see if there's some things that I can pull from this that will allow me to be a better interviewee the next time I get a rep in or the next time I take a leap. So I really think it always comes back to the relationship you have with the word. But one thing to go a little bit deeper, what I do find fascinating just with feedback in general is we all need to have some discernment from who we listen to for feedback, because not everyone's feedback is equal. I mean, if somebody just walks in off the street and tries to tell Stephen Curry he needs to change his shooting form, he should probably stay closed off to that feedback. He doesn't need that feedback from that person because they don't have an expertise that's going to help him. So this mindset that we should always be open to feedback from everyone at all times is actually incorrect. We shouldn't. We should have some discernment over who we listen to feedback from. But once we've discerned that this is someone that truly cares about me and they have an expertise that can allow me to grow and get better, then I want to remain very open to it. And I want to depersonalize it so I don't feel like, they're talking to me. They're really talking to my behavior or talking to my performance. And that is really the key to performing, at a higher level.
Absolutely. And I've gone through that. Even again, I use your example of doing something like this podcast where I have some people, they're giving me feedback on it. It's like, oh, it's just, you need to script it more. It needs to be shorter. It needs to be that kind of thing. And I've just decided I don't care don't talk to me about format. Don't talk to me about my interviewing. I'm not doing this to get better as a podcaster. My job is not, my passions are not to be the best there ever was at podcasting. That's not why I'm doing this. If I did want that, I'd be hungry for that feedback. I've taken some technical feedback like, hey, you got to get a better microphone. You can't just be yelling at your laptop from across the room because people won't listen to it at all. But I've consciously kind of just said, in terms of how I do it, I'm doing it for me. So I'm doing it the way I want to, and I'm not really looking to take any feedback on that, regardless of who it comes from. Now, there's probably a few people that if they gave me some really, really solid feedback on how I do it, like if a famous newscaster gives me a call, is like, hey, I listen to your podcast. Do you want some pointers? Yeah, I think I do. But if my buddy's just like, you should stop talking so much in between your guests, like, I just do whatever feels right on the show.
Yeah. No, I love that you went in that direction, because ultimately the other part of discernment is not only who we take feedback from or who we're open to feedback from, but it's being able to understand the difference between actual feedback and preferences. If someone's preference is to listen to a show that's only 8 to 10 minutes long because they like really short shows, and they give you that feedback and say, hey, you're doing shows that are 40 to 45 minutes, that's way too long. That's not necessarily, that's feedback to a degree, but it's only their personal preference. Right. And that doesn't mean that you should necessarily change anything. Now, if you poll your listeners and you say, hey, I have 1,000 people that listen to this show, and I'm going to actually put out a questionnaire because I want their feedback, and 850 of them say, we would like a shorter show, or we'd like a longer show, well, now that's some feedback you should listen to, because on some level, your goal is probably to serve your audience and your listener base. Yeah. So if they're all saying that, then that's something you should listen to. Doesn't mean you have to change it, but you should be open to it. And to me, that's one of the issues, is we can oftentimes feel pulled in a multitude of different directions because everyone's just offering their unsolicited preferences and their own opinions, and that's not going to do anything to move the needle. So I find for myself, what really helps is I will ask specific people for specific feedback on something, and then I don't have to worry about, kind of swimming through this sea of unsolicited preferences. So, my speaking agent, Michelle, if she's going to come watch me speak, I may say, hey, here's something that I'm working on. I'm working on having more natural movement on stage. I would love for you to watch my talk, and at the end, give me your feedback on how I'm moving on stage. So I'm very specific in asking someone that I trust, that the feedback they'll offer will be valid, and I'm giving her something very specific to look for. So it's not just, hey, what'd you think of my talk? No, I don't necessarily need that. I need you to use your expertise to tell me that. And one other thing I'll say on this whole feedback concept, when most people ask for feedback, what they're really secretly wanting is just praise.
Yeah.
Basically, that's kind of a passive aggressive way of saying, can you tell me how good this is? Yeah. Because I've had some friends, and I mean this very respectfully, they'll say, hey, I'm working on this course. Can you give me some feedback on this course? And I'm like, it's already done. Like, you've already published this course. You're already selling it. Why are you asking for my feedback when you're not going to change anything? What you mean to say is, hey, Alan, can you tell me how awesome this course is? So, feedback would be, hey, I'm thinking of launching this online course in 3 months. Here are a couple areas that I could really use your expertise on to make this thing, in best of service of future customers. Can you give me some feedback? And then actually use that feedback to help course correct or to design the course. But when you ask someone for feedback on something that's already done, you're really not looking for feedback, because now nothing can be changed, and it's ultimately kind of pointless. And that happens all of the time on social media. You know,
Oh,
hey everyone, here's my TED talk. Can you guys give me feedback on it? Like, what are you talking about? There's nothing to change. Yes, we'll like it and we'll say it's great. And you're no better off for it. Except now you've insulated yourself with a bunch of yes men and yes women that are just telling you things to make you feel better. And it's not even helping you uncover some of these blind spots or a way to improve.
oh my gosh, that's directly connected to an experience I had not long ago with a server at a restaurant. And I very rarely say anything if service is poor. I respect the crap out of those people. They work really hard. And get very, very little of what they deserve for it. But she asked me, how did you feel the service was? And she was terrible. Now, I framed it. I had my coach hat on. I said, we've had you multiple times here. We're regulars. I've seen you be great at what you do. I know you're capable of being amazing at this. And I really feel like on nights like tonight where you're not putting in the effort, that it really comes out in terms of the quality of service that I get. And she cried. And it's like and then I got yelled at by another staff member there because they told me that I made, like, they were mad that I made her cry. And I was like, so we don't really want feedback. And now I'm telling the story and everybody listening is going to be like, wow, what a jerk. But it's like, it was like, how did you feel the service was?
Well, and if you want to unpack this even more, I mean, in truth, you didn't make her cry. She chose to cry as her response. And that's another one that's incredibly important to be able to understand these things is, you know, she asked for feedback, which means you should be honest and truthful. And you were, and that was simply her response. And you shouldn't, now none of us most likely ever want to make another human being feel bad.
Right.
But sometimes telling people the things they need to hear instead of the things they want to hear, even if it temporarily makes them uncomfortable or makes them feel bad, that can end up being the spark that will lead to growth. So you may have done her one of the biggest favors ever by being one of the few people that's willing to be that honest and that straightforward and care enough to tell her the truth, so that hopefully now she'll make some changes. And yes, while it may sting temporarily that night, hopefully she wakes up the next day with more of a growth mindset and ready to take another leap. You know, I know that as a professional keynote speaker, you know, I'm getting feedback all of the time. Many times it is unsolicited. You know, someone will basically come up and say, hey, you know, you want to hear my thoughts on your talk? And, you know, then how you choose to navigate that is just your own decision. But then many times the event that I'm speaking at will put out a formal questionnaire to gather actual feedback. And they ask them, you know, the attendees or the participants, you know, what did you think of Alan's message? What did you think of his delivery? What did you learn? What would you have liked to have seen him do differently? And that stuff's important. And, you know, as much as I do my best to depersonalize it, that is not always an easy thing to do. And that really brings us to the concept of the difference between basic and easy. You know, reading through some reviews that someone has on a talk you just gave and depersonalizing it is a very basic concept, but it's not easy to do. If someone were to say, you know, hey, I thought that, you know, it was the worst talk I've ever seen, it's hard not to personalize that. It's hard not to let that sting. But I take that as just another rep of practice to work on that muscle. And that's why for me, for the most part, when I do get mass feedback, like evaluations from a speaking engagement, I don't pay very much attention to the super duper great ones. And I don't pay very much attention to the really, really negative ones, you know, because I'm aware that when someone's offering their feedback, especially through a questionnaire, it's going to be biased towards the emotional state they're in at that time. You know, if somebody woke up that morning and they weren't feeling well and their dog passed away the night before and, you know, they've got all these bad things going on in their life, and then they come hear me speak, they're probably not in the most positive frame of mind, which means their review of me might be a little more scathing than it would normally be. Well, same thing for someone else. If their life is just going along swimmingly great and, you know, everything is wonderful, then they might be a little more favorable to me than they would be if they were somewhat neutral. So I usually throw out the extremities and I pay attention to the meat of those evaluations. And then after that, I start to look for trends. If one person says, well, I didn't like that one story, and 800 other people didn't have a problem with it, then I'm not going to spend too much time worried about that one outlier. However, if a bunch of people say something, then I at least want to pay attention to it. And it doesn't mean that I have to change, but it means I should at least be aware, because now these people are caring enough to offer me a hand, extend an olive branch that could allow me to make an improvement. So I know that was kind of a major tangent, but hopefully is helpful all under this umbrella of feedback.
Absolutely. And it, without getting into debating or needing to define the actual words themselves, looking at it through your own lens and your own definitions, do you believe that fulfillment creates significance, or that significance creates fulfillment?
I would think, well, to me, the way I look at it is fulfillment creates significance. Yeah. If you're doing what really fills your bucket, and you feel that you're doing something of service to others that you've been called to do, it's in alignment with your strengths, it's something you enjoy, to me, that's kind of the perfect cocktail that will create fulfillment. And the more time you can spend in a fulfilled state, where you feel like you're utilizing your strengths and talents, where you're doing things that you love, you are helping people or in service of someone or something. If you can do that long enough, then I believe you're living a significant life.
Yeah. That's, again, I think that I probably could have guessed about which side you'd sit on there, but I didn't want to assume anything. And that kind of brings up for me this concept around learning and growth that I've really done a deep dive on over probably the last 4 or 5 years. If you, as you said, like anybody who's following Mike Gervais or any of the other kind of like Brene Browns of the world and stuff like that right now, all unreal work. I'm so deep into breathing and mindfulness right now. Like I'm so immersed in it to the point where I'm practicing it while I'm driving to combat road rage, and I'm doing it in moments and trying to teach it in moments to athletes and students and people in our corporate settings for dealing with feedback and managing the physiological reactions to criticism, and that kind of thing. And I'm curious about if you have any kind of practice around breathing, mindfulness, meditation, that kind of thing.
I do, and the most specific of which is I use the Headspace app, and I do a 10-minute guided meditation every morning. And one of the neat parts about Headspace is they've kind of got a gamification component to it, because they keep track of your run streak and how many consecutive days you do it. And this morning was actually my 1,150th straight morning following a 10-minute guided meditation. And
damn, Alan.
Within that, for some 10 minutes, I'm incredibly present and dialed in and mindful and aware. And other times that I do that morning practice, my mind is like a squirrel. So I'm far from being perfect at even doing a 10-minute guided meditation. But I will say the cumulative effect of starting every single day with this 10-minute slice that is dedicated towards being present and being aware and connecting to breath has been an absolute game changer for me. I mean, it's allowed me to start every day from a much more grounded position. And I love that. And it really speaks volumes to that mantra that little things done consistently make a huge difference. And there's so much truth to that. I resisted even the concept of meditation, for the first, 41 and a half years of my life. It just never resonated with me. And then a mentor said, well, just try this app. To try it for you got to give me at least a couple months, because that's one of the big mistakes people make with mindfulness. I'll have people say, hey, I did the Headspace app 3 days last week and I didn't notice any difference. And I was like, no, I get it. And, you can also go to the gym and lift weights for 3 days, and I promise you won't look any different. You'll probably be sore, but you won't look any different. So yet you really have to make the commitment to do it a little more long-term. I don't remember the exact tipping point, but I want to say after I was about 3 or 4 months in, I just started subjectively noticing a difference in how I felt. A perfect example, you said road rage, just your patience in general. Patience has never been a strong suit of mine. but I'm more of a patient person now. I'm calmer. In fact, there's not much that anyone can do that can really get me rattled or frazzled or give me road rage even when I'm not driving. And I think that's a testament to this daily practice. And, it's just 10 minutes. And I choose to start my day that way and absolutely love it. So yeah, mindfulness and awareness and presence is crucial to staying grounded. And for me, it's really the only path to being able to work towards having that fulfillment that we were speaking about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a Calm guy, the Calm app.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I haven't tried Headspace, but I do have a couple colleagues who have recommended to it. But
I think they're very similar.
Yeah, and I'm in my thing now. Like I got Tamara Levitt is one of the narrators on there, and I go to her, she does the daily Calm, and I'm right in on that. And I've noticed a similar change around the same mark, like around about the 4 month mark of practice was when I noticed a difference. But the biggest difference I noticed actually brings us full circle, which was that I just let go. It was like I'd eventually just breathed so much that I'd breathed out caring what people thought of me. Like it literally, and I know for a fact in my coaching early, because when I started coaching full time as a head coach, college basketball at 23, and I guided so many of my decisions based on what bosses, players, fans, for whatever fans we had, would think of me. And looking back now, obviously with hindsight as well, but wow, like was I ever guided, even in my teaching, because I was teaching at this college as well. The teaching was so guided by others' opinions. And now that I think part of it is the autonomy of being a business owner and being able to make a lot more decisions and be accountable to them positively or negatively every day. But I just hit this point in my mindfulness practice where it was like, I don't care. I could care less. And again, it connects back to what you were saying on feedback, which is like, there are some people, and I've started doing more of what you spoke of as well, where I'm removing more and more people almost subconsciously who are just yes people. And really starting to surround myself with close friends, especially who are critical and will give me some critical feedback when necessary. I have a mom. She's the endless lover. Everything I do is perfect for mom.
That's good.
And I don't need that from every person who surrounds me. And I think that my mindfulness practice is just taking it to a whole other level where one of those people could sit me down and tell me that, like, Ken, I listened to your podcast with Alan, and you had a really cool guest and you blew it. Like you didn't hit the right stuff. And I would just be like, I honestly wouldn't even feel, not only would I not react extrinsically, but I would internally not even feel that emotional rise, that gut punch, that physiological side. And yeah, similar to you, I can't speak enough about it and how much I've seen it help the young athletes and students that I've helped with it and introduced to it. It changes their life, especially during this challenging time where it's like managing anxieties and change and unknowns is so important.
Well, without question, I love everything that you just said. And I really attribute this mindfulness practice to my perspective now during the year 2020. I mean, if we really unpack it, and I'm sure I'll miss a couple of the big stones. I mean, we started the year with the passing of Kobe Bryant, and then we immediately went to a global pandemic that has completely upended the world as we know it. Throw in there the social unrest and some of the murders that have taken place of unarmed black men here in the United States and the protests that have ensued. And then you throw in, right now the wildfires going on in California. I mean, this year has been a perfect storm of adversity. And I've been able to take most of these things in stride. And I think a lot of that can be attributed to this mindfulness practice. I mean, I certainly wish that everything that I just mentioned hadn't happened. And I hope that we can work through and persevere through these different things. But I've been able to stay rather level during one of the most challenging years of the 44 that I've been on this planet. And I'm very thankful for that. And of course, that's kind of, it's easy to say because I started practicing this this mindfulness, 1,000 days literally before a lot of this stuff started. So that's much more challenging than someone that's trying to start it right now. But you need to go ahead and do that, because certainly even when 2020 is over, it's not like our lives will be, inoculated from adversity and challenges. So the more you can start investing in the skill set of being aware and being grounded and being present and being able to take breaths, it's only going to help you be that much more resilient moving forward. And there were two other thoughts that I think fit nicely in with this. One, Eckhart Tolle, and I don't know how one actually describes him. I mean, he's kind of a philosopher. He's a speaker. Yeah. He's an author. I mean, I don't know what title he prefers. But he basically said, stress is the desire for things to be differently than they currently are. And for some reason, that just hit me, square in the forehead when I first heard that a few years ago. And it was like, okay, stress. And I know there are some good stresses, but for the most part, we do the best we can to manage our daily stresses. And it all comes from our decision to want things to be different than they are. In theory, when you used to get road rage, you were getting road rage because you had a desire for the car in front of you to do something differently than it was currently doing, or all of the cars in front of you to not be there anymore. And that's what caused your stress. If you could just take a deep breath and just go, this guy in front of me that's driving like a complete idiot is doing that to teach me a lesson on patience. So it's actually a good thing that he's here. Or this moron in front of me is doing this so that I'll become a safer driver and a more alert driver. So he's actually doing me a favor by driving so recklessly. When we start to reframe it, now we take control back. And the other thought that I had, I learned this from a gentleman who's the mental skills coach for San Francisco Giants in Major League Baseball. And he said, our emotions are designed to inform us. They're not designed to direct us. And that was another one that just, for some reason, the way that he phrased that really resonated with me. And he's basically saying, no matter what emotion you're feeling, and we have a wide palette of emotions for a reason, there is nothing wrong with feeling angry or feeling frustrated or disappointed or any host of emotions. There's nothing wrong with feeling those things. That's just information that we need to take in. Now, where we run into a problem is if we let our mindset or our behavior or the things that we say, if they're a direct reflection of those, now we have an issue. So if I'm feeling angry and I choose to use that in a way that I do something destructive or say something rude to someone else, now we have a problem. But as long as I don't let it dictate my behavior, then I'm okay. And that's where this mindfulness comes back. As you just said, you could get a scathing email review of this podcast, but you have the mindfulness to not let that affect your behavior and your mindset moving forward. And those are two things that I work on every single day of my life. I've made much better progress and am going in the right direction, but I'm far from being the finished product to put under museum glass. But anytime I find myself stressed about something, I just remember that Eckhart Tolle quote and say, hey, just stop wishing for things to be different. I don't like the phrase, it is what it is. But there's a lot of truth to that, Yeah, I mean, I can wish that this global pandemic would be over tomorrow morning all I want. It's not going to be, and me wishing it's not going to, expedite the process. So I just have to learn how to live with what is and accept what is for whatever reason. And then when I do find myself angry or frustrated or disappointed, not allowing those to consume my behavior and direct the way that I act towards the world. And I'm batting a much better percentage today than I ever have in my life, but want to continue to get reps and take these leaps so that I'll be even better moving forward.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I agree with you on it is what it is. It doesn't really capture everything. I do have whatever will be tattooed on my body though. So that was like that. And that's just right out of Que Sera Sera. And I got it tattooed for my late grandmother. She used to sing that. So that one for some reason resonated a little bit more. But I like that. Yeah, it's just it just connects a little bit more to me. But while we're sharing quotes from people, I really enjoyed yours, and it made me think of one that I heard from a psychologist friend here in Canada who actually was fortunate enough to work with Bernie Holiday and the Pittsburgh Pirates. And it was, you need to make sure, or I might be bastardizing this a little bit, you need to keep your head where your feet are.
Yes.
And that one I've always loved. And another, just to connect with Dr. Gervais again, is that there are no big moments, only this moment. That's, and he uses
the
it.
Definition of presence. I mean,
Yes.
that's one of the things that Michael does so well, is talk about being in the present moment. And that's the only way to be truly happy, because we can easily be distracted on previous moments and we can easily get anxious about future moments, but neither one of those things is serving a very positive purpose. Now, with that said, I do believe we should learn from the past, and I do believe we should be prepared for the future, but that's not what should be, that's not where we should live. That should not be occupying our mental space. Just be in the moment. That's another one. I don't know who originally said it, but if you want to win the moment, you have to be in the moment. And there's a lot of truth to that as well. So I'm sure we could exchange quotes and cliches for another 20 minutes just on these things. But any of these cliches, they've been around for a while because they're true. I mean, it is what it is. I think it depends on who's saying that. If it's somebody that's scholarly and revered, it's one of the deepest statements you could ever hear. If not, you're just like, this person's an idiot. But they basically, there's a lot of truth to that. And I think having that mindset is vital. And this all stems back to connect the dots, that having these different types of mindsets are not an accident. They take practice. Anything that you want to improve needs reps and needs practice, purposeful practice. And that's where this daily, mindfulness practice, even just 10 minutes a day, can help you sharpen that sword to do these things. And if you're willing to make that commitment over time, you'll really start to build that muscle. And that's ultimately what everyone should be aiming to do.
Awesome. Yeah. And we blew my plan to go 45 minutes or less.
Yeah,
and
I think an hour and 15 was pretty good though. I think this was the perfect amount. Certainly anyone listening, they reserve the right to listen to it into 2 45-minute blocks. So they didn't have to listen to it all at once if they didn't want to, but hopefully we kept them engaged and kept them listening. And I will say, not that you asked for feedback, but lots of folks have their opinion on how long a podcast should be or how long a YouTube video should be. And it's been my experience, as long as the content is compelling and it's adding value, then the length is irrelevant. Now, I have some podcasts I listen to that are close to 2.5 hours. And the reason I listen for 2.5 hours is because everything they say is compelling and adds value to my life. If they've only got 20 minutes of value in a 2.5 hour podcast, then they should start trimming some fat. But, any video, I've watched YouTube videos that are 2 minutes long. I've watched YouTube videos that are 20 minutes long, and there is no right answer as long as what you're putting out there is helpful. And I certainly believe that the conversation you and I just had will be helpful to others. But ultimately we have to let go of that because we're not the judge and jury. Only your listeners will decide.
Absolutely. And I want to let you go here. And I do have the quick question for you once we get off recording, because I do enjoy some of the interaction that I get before and after I'm recording that the people listening never get to hear. But I want to hit you with a couple of quick hitters.
Sure.
Just because it's my curiosity and I don't know. I think it's kind of fun sometimes to get people's perspective. So the first one will be as tight and concise as possible. What would your best advice on learning and growing be?
Your ultimate goal should be to become the best version of yourself. And you can frame that however you want. And the only way you can become the best version of yourself, the only path, is to constantly be open and pursuing learning and growth.
And I want to caveat that response for the people that are just listening and not watching the video version, that Alan's saying that while he's got Kevin Durant sitting behind him, LeBron, Kobe's over there. And so I think you might have experienced a little bit about helping people and being around people who learn and grow efficiently. So I want to make sure that there's a full image in the people that are just listening.
I love it.
Who's going to win, Denver or the Clippers?
Wow. I'm not going to bet against Kawhi. I think Kawhi is that good. But it's really been neat to see that Denver never gives up, and they're a threat. I don't think it's going to be an easy game, but if you're going to make me put money on it, I just can't bet against Kawhi in a game 7.
See, and I think I'm going Nuggets for sure. The adjustments
Okay.
they made, and I don't think it's a maybe in my head. I think the Nuggets win by maybe close to 10.
Okay. Well,
Yep,
drop me an email. Drop me an email tomorrow morning and let's see what happens.
cool. Do you have anybody who's not a quote unquote basketball person? Because if anybody who follows you or looks you up can really connect themselves basketball wise through your stuff. But do you have anybody that we haven't spoken about today who's not a quote unquote basketball person that you would direct people to go towards to learn or maybe just find a little bit of growth?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm sure there are several. I think the best thing to do, and this is not a trick by any means. If someone goes, I'm at Alan Stein Jr. on Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook. Go to your platform of choice and look at the people that I follow and the people that I'm consuming. And I know there's a good handful of people that have nothing to do with the game of basketball. And then that way, those are the people that I absolutely do follow. So, for me, it's so important to look for areas of growth and look to learn things from people that are outside my direct domain. In fact, most of the people that I read, watch, and listen to at present are not basketball people. I've done that for most of my life. Certainly have not learned everything there is to learn from the game or from the people in the game, but that's where I spent the vast majority of my time. So, most of the books I read and podcasts I listen to and audiobooks, they're not in the basketball space.
Awesome. And you got my last question by plugging some of your handles so that people can follow you, which is perfect. Well, I really appreciate you giving up your time. I know you're a busy guy. I appreciate you so much for sharing it with me. And hopefully in a year from now, when I call you back to do a follow-up, we'll be looking back and be like, wow, we knew so little then, but don't we appreciate that?
Yeah. Well, I'm even more looking forward to you emailing me tomorrow and saying, I can't believe that Kawhi had 47 and 15 and they beat the Nuggets by 6.
Fair. And I'll commit to it. I'll hold up my end of the bargain.
I love it. No,
Awesome.
this was a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. We'll talk soon. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get podcasts or to this YouTube channel to hear our weekly episodes.